There was darkness, warmth, the closeness of damp earth, the pleasure of tending the growing, of shaping it, pruning it where required, and nurturing it. Then there was a different darkness, a darkness filled with pain, with unfamiliar motion, burning heat, and the smell of scorched flesh and earth. Yelek placed his graspers to his head as it threatened to split open from the pain. His digits dislodged patches of burnt chitin that peeled away from his normally smooth outer shell. Carefully, he checked over his antennae, feeling they're frayed and disheveled, but thankfully not burnt. State brought some relief to him. How long had he been unconscious? Grunting with effort, he pulled himself up and out of the partially collapsed earthen tunnel, freeing his metathorax and abdomen, along with his lowermost set of legs. Walking on fours and using his graspers to alternatively trace along the wall for support and continue holding his head together, he slowly emerged from the tunnel into the main garden. The ultraviolet light was dim here, blocked out by dense smoke, but the infrared was rich and dark. In a panic, Yelek pushed his way out of the tunnel into the garden proper, coughing as smoke and ash entered his airway, and his nictitating membranes blinking rapidly to clear his large, compound eyes. He collapsed to his knees. This pain was deeper, a spiritual pain that struck to his very soul and forced out a howl of anguish. The garden, the life tree, so much effort to protect it, and yet here it burned, maybe along with his future brothers and sisters secured deep in the other tunnels. Thick plumes of dark smoke swirled up into the domed ceiling as the air system circulated the atmosphere, but fresh smoke and ash rapidly replenished it in a continuous stream. The thought of his mission being a failure, of the death of not just his brothers and sisters, but also the life tree burning to ash, was enough to snap him back to the here and now. He needed to douse the flames and prevent them from spreading. Glancing around the immense arboretum, he saw he was close to the outer wall and one of the gates into the more mechanical sections of the ship. Maybe one of the crew would be able to help him. If not, he should be able to find the fire suppressors if he made it to the environmental controls. With a jerk, Yelek pushed himself up onto his spindly rear legs and wobbled unsteadily towards the gate, his large mantis-like form crashing through the spindly profusion of dark red leaves growing all around the arboretum, many of which were now blackened or coated in ash. Julian edged the shuttle closer at Ahmed's insistence, ready at the slightest sign of reaction from the alien ship to put the pedal to the metal and get the hell out of Dodge. Seriously, this has to be close enough now, Julian complained, glancing at the astrometric plot. We're pretty much able to reach out and touch it. Ahmed studiously ignored him as he and two engineers who had come up from the rear crew compartment were crowded around a set of screens, mumbling and exclaiming at each other while gesticulating at various readouts. Dr. White sighed from his seat where he was monitoring the communication system, a fairly uneventful task given that there hadn't been any response at all to the hundreds of automated messages sent out across half a dozen different technologies. Hyperspace communicator, radio, even good old-fashioned Morse code from the spotlights. I'm pretty sure that if someone on that ship wanted us to stay away, they would have been able to make their feelings clear, Julian. Given the heat radiating out from it, it's quite possible the interior of the ship isn't hospitable to sustaining life, and so there is no one left to really care too much what we do. Will, one of the engineers, suddenly interjected. I don't know, Doc. The outer hull looks to be some kind of graphene composite. That stuff is really good for shedding excess heat or even converting it to electrical energy, which can then be stored or used elsewhere. Given the mass distribution, it is quite likely most of the ship's structure is made out of the stuff. The weird power readings may well be some kind of electrical heat pumping system to remove excess heat from the inside to the outer skin, meaning the inside may not be too hot. Will turned back to the other engineers and immersed himself back in their discussion again. Julian looked between Will and Dr. White, eyebrow raised. "Well, okay then. I guess they just don't want to talk to you." Dr. White shook his head slightly and turned back to the communication system again. Perhaps if the ship was so heavily geared towards maintaining temperatures, that might suggest some kind of biological affinity to heat. Pursing his lips, he studied the options related to the infrared banding. Yelek staggered into the corridor. He could feel the heat flowing in the walls as the ship tried to stabilize the internal temperature. He could even see the dark flow of color as the surface layers suddenly blossomed hotter as they were overloaded before the automated systems reserted control and drew the heat away again. He could also see the burnt and desiccated remains of several crew littering the floor, likely unfortunate casualties of trying to siphon heat away from the arboretum and other critical systems, causing the corridors in non-essential area turn into ovens. At least he could see clearly in here, the ultraviolet light not being obscured by smoke. Glancing at the glowing symbols on the far wall, Yelek broke into a run in the direction indicated for the Arboretum Environmental Control Room. "Amy, how are we coming on the assembly of a larger quarantine bay?" Amy flicked through her screens and pulled up the fabrication module, studying it before responding. "Pretty good, Captain. The main structure has been turned out and the engineers have already programmed the assembly robots with the standard template, so it should be heading for welding now. They've also got stores transferring gravity plating, environmental and other systems, power and so on across for integration. Senior Engineer Young has put through some adaptations to the standard systems to the rest of the engineering team, which are just being checked over, mainly to increase the range of environmental outputs available in case we need to end up housing any of the aliens for any extended period of time." "Good thinking, Yang," Rosalind murmured. It was good that her crew were thinking ahead of the immediate task at hand. She just hoped any aliens staying on the ship would be friendly guests rather than injured, or worse, prisoners. Her thoughts were interrupted by contact from the shuttle. She listened to Ahmed's report, frowning slightly before nodding. "Understood, Ahmed. The hull temperature is too high to attempt physical contact, and there are currently no indications of any openings, hatches, or other means of entry." She sighed. "Still no contact from the ship." Dr. White cut in. "No. Unfortunately, nothing so far, Captain." Rosalind pinched the bridge of her nose and massaged her eyes as she thought over what to do next. "Okay, Julian. Given the ship appears to be physically intact, I want you to go ahead and gently, and I repeat, gently tractor it to rest. We don't know what kind of gravity dampers they may have or even if they are functioning, so I don't want to run the risk of splatting anyone inside against the walls. Okay?" "Yes, Captain," replied Julian. Suddenly the wall became the floor and Yelek was catapulted across the corridor with a screech. Tucking himself into a tight ball to protect his head and limbs, his hard shell rang as it struck the wall. Stunned for a moment, his senses going fuzzy around the edges, he forced himself to uncoil and pulled himself back up. The soles of his tarsa felt hot. The ship, not realizing that it was now sideways, was still pumping excess heat through what until moments ago was the wall. Cursing colorfully under his breath, Yelek made it to the next intersection. Looking up, he could see the door to the environmental control room approximately 15 meters above him. Below him, the corridor curved out of sight as it encircled the diameter of the ship's hull. With aching muscles, the segmented plates on his back drew aside and his membranous wings unfolded. Yelek fluttered them experimentally, but his flight muscles appeared to be working fine, if sore like the rest of him. With a deep buzzing, his wings blurred and he sailed up the corridor. Julian seemed quite pleased with himself as he manipulated the tractor controls to slowly reduce the slow tumble of the ship and bleed off its forward momentum. "Now that," he exclaimed, "is what I call gentle."